Hello, my name is Cody. Welcome to the Unifying Field podcast, where we journey beyond the black and white into the vast spectrum of human experience. Here we explore the great question of why we are here, seeking wisdom in all traditions and unity in our diversity. My mission is to bridge worlds, uniting hearts and minds through conversation, curiosity, and the shared wonder of existence. So take a deep breath, in through your nose. Open your mind and join me as we step into the infinite together. In the beginning was the Word, brushstroke by brushstroke. God began painting his masterpiece of the universe, which had a unique planet called Earth, which is where his most precious creation inhabited. He made humans in his image, and he looked out over his beautiful creation and was well pleased. God was hanging out in heaven, chilling with the archangels. You know, a fine seventh day of rest. While relaxing in his hammock, Archangel Michael interrupted. God, I think you need to come see this. Annoyed, God responded, seriously? I just got comfortable. Can I not just relax for one day? Then he got up and saw what man was doing. They were all corrupt and evil and doing the most disgusting things, making a mockery of his creation. Hey, you little shits, what the hell are you doing? And he started destroying them because he regretted making them. Alright, so that was all a joke. Don't get your panties twisted. I imagine God has a sense of humor as well. If your God doesn't, then I feel sorry for you. I think that's where humor came from in the first place. So if he didn't want us to laugh, he shouldn't have added it to the programming. And I hope you like to laugh as much as I do. Okay, enough joking around. Let's get serious for a moment, because this topic is going to get pretty dark, so be warned. It has taken me a lot longer to get this episode out than I planned, and I think I've come to realize that it wasn't just that I got busy with making a cardboard Scooby-Doo mystery machine for Halloween for my family, and then spent a few days replacing broken parts in my truck, which were all fun, but time-consuming. I think it was deeper than that. I think I needed to step away from it for a while. You see, when you cover a dark topic that really ignites anger and disgust, it can end up consuming you if you become attached to it and let it drag you under. It would be easy to focus only on the negative and conclude that, in this case, we're better off without religion. Maybe that's true in the grand scheme, but I can't claim to know the right answer. We must each decide for ourselves and be given the space and freedom to do so. I am merely a fellow human that is in search of answers and raising my consciousness. And I want to help you do the same. I also don't want to divide us any further than we already are. I want to unite us. And so I am today simply presenting ideas and information. And for the record, despite all of the bad, there is a lot of good that religion brought to people. So let's begin. In the beginning was the Word. I know I like to start a lot of my episodes off like that, but I'm going to do it again. In the beginning was the Word, and humankind twisted it and used it to justify the most evil acts. God made man in his image, and then man made God in his image through the creation of religion. Perhaps you can see where I'm heading with this. Has religion brought us closer to God or pulled us further away? Are we better off thinking for ourselves? Or do these ancient frameworks guide us toward good? My background is more Christianity than anything, which you may have noticed by now, and I still hang around it in some shape or form, even if I don't practice it. I really enjoy this TV show called The Chosen, for example. The Chosen makes me think of the good old days of Jesus teaching the good stuff, the real stuff, before Paul came along and ruined everything. In the most recent season, season 5, which revolves around the Last Supper, episode 4 to be exact, there's a scene where the Apostle John, not John the Baptizer, is sitting in the courtyard of this house that everybody's staying at, Jesus and the apostles. Jesus notices John sitting on a bench, staring at a piece of artwork on the wall. And then Jesus sits down next to him on the bench. Jesus asks John what this painting is about, and John responds that it's a Greek painting. And actually, the Greek stole the idea from the Jews, and it's actually the story of Jephthah from the book of Judges. John explains that it's about how Jephthah made a vow to God that if he was able to defeat the Ammonites, if God helped him achieve victory, the first thing to come out of his house after defeating them will be made into a burnt offering to God. But to Jephthah's dismay, his daughter is the first thing to come out of his house. And so he held to his word and sacrificed his only daughter. Jesus responded to John, misguided, something my Father would never ask him to do. Everyone did what is right in his own eyes. This interaction between Jesus and John isn't documented in the Bible. Believe me, I checked. So it is likely filling in gaps to make a TV series and probably wasn't something that actually happened. But it does reflect the Jesus I know and what he came to teach. I'm not going to assume the script was meant the way I interpreted it, being a little mystical in its fabric. But it reminded me of a few things. The first is that the God of the Old Testament is not the God that Jesus preached. Anytime I hear that the Christian God is unchanging and all-loving, unconditionally for that matter, and forgiving, and turns around and is jealous and regretful about how awful his creation is and destroys it. And he was even originally bloodthirsty, yet became satisfied after sending his son here to be sacrificed. I just shake my head and I'm like, yeah, okay. That's not the God I know from meditation. Anyways, I love The Chosen because it reminds me of Jesus, the rabbi, aka the teacher before Christianity forgot his teachings and diluted his message. The next point I think the scriptwriters may have been trying to show is that people throughout history have been misguided by misinterpreting these stories and lessons from the religious texts. And like Jesus said, his Father never told them to do that. Regardless of what God is involved, people twist and justify their ideologies to carry out horrible things in the name of religion. But it is not as easy as saying religion is bad and we must condemn religion because people do bad things in its name. It's a little more complicated than that. People get hurt in car accidents, for example. But cars are simply vehicles to move people from one place to another. Most of the time, cars get us where we need to go, way quicker than if we were to walk. But sometimes we get into accidents and we get hurt. There are safety protocols that help reduce our likelihood of getting hurt, such as seatbelts and airbags and engineering through crash tests to make accidents more survivable. And we assume the risk because the odds of the reward are a lot higher than the risk for injury, or at least that is our understanding of it. Similarly, religions are vehicles that can hurt people, but they can also bring tremendous good to people's lives. Some of the things I want to explore in this episode are questions like, what makes a religion and what are some positive and negative aspects of it? Will we be so divided if it wasn't for a religion? And that poses a big question. For all of the awful things that religion brought with it, is religion actually bad? Are we worse off since we have religion? Will we be better off thinking for ourselves than having pre-programmed beliefs from whatever religion we were raised in? Do you know about the Christian genocide going on around the world today? These are some of the questions I want to tackle as we explore many perspectives that are for or potentially against religion. Before diving into the good, the bad, and the complicated, let's start with the basics. What exactly is religion? Some say religion is a set of shared beliefs and rituals, often focused on a higher power. These beliefs help create values and rules among its members, of which they strive to live up to, perhaps rewarding for compliance and punishing for noncompliance. It can also offer insight into life's deepest questions, like, why is there so much pain? Or where did we go when we die? It may revolve around a fixed set of texts or stories and may contain one or many gods, goddesses, or none at all. Or at least that is my first thought. when I think of what religion is. I really like Ram Dass's way of looking at these types of things. He would say that Maharaji, his guru, was a doorway. A doorway to what, you might ask? A doorway to the infinite, to the father in patriarchal religions such as Christianity, to the mother in matriarchal religions such as parts of Hinduism, or even the goddesses of the various pagan pantheons. But in this sense, the different religions and its enlightened beings are all doorways. The idols that people focus on are doorways. Jesus is a doorway. Buddha is a doorway. Hecate is a doorway. Hanuman is a doorway. Kali Ma is a doorway. The countless pagan deities are doorways. Diana, Artemis, Zeus, Jupiter, and Odin are all doorways. Each respective religion is a doorway, utilizing the enlightened beings or gods and goddesses as its point of focus. And then that point of focus, or simply the idol of that being, is a doorway to Source, God, the universe, whatever you want to call the infinite. Though I don't consider myself Christian anymore, I still go to church from time to time. In fact, I went with my family last weekend and had a good time. My wife is a Christian and my daughters enjoy going, so I go as well sometimes. I've mentioned in previous episodes how I love Jesus and I love the music. The music that was chosen that day was on point for speaking to my soul. The music was a doorway for me to connect to God on that day. Since I love Jesus, and that is my foundation from which I expand outward into mysticism, magic, and beyond, I like to talk about Jesus. He is one of my many teachers who is always talking in my ear. You might be aware that Jesus spoke on different levels at once. You have a more literal interpretation, and you have a metaphysical or esoteric interpretation. In John 14:6, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Does the doorway idea make sense now? Jesus is literally telling us that he is the pathway and we must walk through his door. Or rather, the door of the Christ or Christ consciousness to reach the Father. Fundamentalist Christianity takes this to mean that the physical Jesus is the doorway and what is beyond, and that to get to the Father we must give ourselves to him and to worship him, even though in the Ten Commandments it is said to have no idols. Metaphysics teaches that Christ is the doorway, and Jesus, the human, is a material focal point guiding us through it. The Christ within us is our connection to the infinite and to each other. Some call this the divine spark. Others call it the soul, or Christ consciousness. Perhaps it's the higher self. Maybe it's the kingdom of heaven within, like Jesus spoke of. Another way to look at religion is also another Ram Dass concept, which is of the finger pointing at the moon. The finger pointing at the moon would be like Jesus the human, or any of the enlightened teachers or deities and the teachings they left for us. And then the moon would represent the source, or God the Father, or the Divine Mother, or enlightenment, whatever floats your boat as the end goal. When we break down the idea of the finger pointing at the moon, we realize the finger pointing at the moon is not, in fact, the moon. It is like a compass. No, a map or a GPS that is pointing the way to the moon. If we focus on the finger only, we miss the real goal, which is what the finger was pointing towards. One of the great movies of all time, at least in my opinion, was Robin Williams' Patch Adams, which was based on a true story. When Patch was in the psychiatric facility, he met a brilliant guy who had seemingly gone mad. This guy kept asking him, "How many fingers am I holding up?" Patch would answer with the correct number. But every time, the guy would get so frustrated, even though he gave him the correct number of fingers he held up. But that wasn't the question he was asking. The answer wasn't the number of fingers he held up. The physical fingers he held up was the problem. The solution was the number of fingers you saw when looking through the problem. The real answer that he was looking for was the number of fingers that your mind or your eyes displayed when you looked through the problem. Similarly, religions and their focal points are not the solutions, but they help us orient towards the correct direction and provide a way to connect with Source. Regardless of the truth we understand, there's still a huge portion of the world who follow traditional religious beliefs and dogma. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Even among the mystics like myself, we all have our own interpretations of truth, and I personally draw truth from many traditions. That's part of the fun of it all. We can all learn from each other, and thus we make each other better than we would by contemplating existence on our own. A diverse understanding of the infinite brings us closer to both the infinite and to each other. For many people, these belief systems create good in their lives and those around them. Whenever possible, I like to focus on the good. So let's start there. Before religion existed, I imagine a few different possibilities. In some ways, life might have been much simpler. Without religious systems, there would likely be far less fear, which is an appealing thought. But humans are naturally curious. We ask questions, and the mystery of existence presses in on us. The trouble is that we aren't equipped to fully understand the architecture of the universe or the intelligences that may run the show. So we do what we can. We create stories. Stories help us make sense of the big questions. They give shape to the unknown, offer figures we can admire, even personalize them or anthropomorphize them, and show us how to live and overcome the hardships we inevitably face. They root us in heritage, cultural, ancestral, spiritual, and they give us something we can claim as our own. One of the first benefits of shared stories is community. People bond quickly around narratives that offer meaning and belonging. Alone, we often feel small and powerless, but within a story larger than ourselves, we draw on the strength of the group. As we live and learn, we discover patterns. Certain actions bring pain to others, and even ourselves. Religions grow from these discoveries, forming guide rails that help us navigate life, along with stories illustrating how missteps cause suffering and how right living sets us free. Religions offer countless examples of people we can look up to as we face our own challenges. I may try to walk in the footsteps of Jesus or be courageous like David when he faced Goliath. I might strive to stand firm in my values like Daniel, whether in the fire or the lion's den. Or if I'm feeling ambitious, I can imagine becoming a great sorcerer like King Solomon, binding the 72 demons of the Goetia to a ring. Well, maybe that story didn't quite make it into the Bible, but the point is the same. Stories give us strength when life becomes difficult. And when we lose someone we love, stories become even more important. Without religion, it might be harder to find hope or even a small spark of positivity when we face death. If we believe that death was simply the end, nothing more, grief might feel even heavier. Instead, beliefs like heaven allow us to say that our loved ones are finally free from pain, resting in a better place. It just helps us make sense of things. Beyond personal hope, religion also motivates people to help others. There is a lot of suffering in the world, and many people need compassion and support. Religious organizations often step forward to meet those needs. Yes, some groups are eager to recruit, but even then, they still try to do good. And among the many people who receive help, I bet some of them are thirsty for God in a way they may not have been presented before. The truth is, many religious communities are full of people with genuinely big hearts, trying their best to make a difference. Of course, religion is not all good. And while it can unite, inspire, and guide, it also has its dangers. And that brings us to the other side. Why religion can sometimes be bad. Buckle up. We're about to head into the underworld. We will be there for a while. I tend to look at religion the same way I look at water. Water, like most things, isn't inherently good or bad. It's simply water. If I'm thirsty, it hydrates me. If I'm gardening, it keeps my crops alive. And on a rainy day, my favorite kind of day, I can sit back and relax, listening to the peaceful drops hitting the roof. But the same water can turn destructive. A gentle rain can become a downpour that floods my home, washes away those crops, and threatens my life. That's more of a Mother Nature example, so let's shift it a little bit. Think about waterboarding. the classic spy movie torture scene, Jason Bourne style. Something that normally gives life is suddenly used to take life. Religion is like that too. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." But when religion is wielded incorrectly, like the waterboarding example, it can drain the life right out of people, and that usually starts with power. Before I go deeper into that, it might help to explain where I'm coming from. My belief, and yes, I know this isn't exactly popular among fundamentalists, is that religions were designed in ways that separate the individual from their own direct connection to God or the source. That loss of connection creates fear, shame, guilt, and a collective ego. Don't believe me? Ever felt guilt or shame for wanting to have sex before marriage? That's religious programming. And Christianity in particular leans heavily on fear. Fear of hell, fear of eternal torture, fear of not being good enough. I know this firsthand. That's why I got saved as a kid. Christians often live in a constant state of end times, where the world could end at any moment. You're told you're born a sinner, unworthy of heaven. And naturally, people become easy to control when fear is the default setting. That is such a shitty way to live, and I found myself there a lot growing up. Now, even though I disagree with religion these days, mainly because of those limiting aspects, I still support anyone's freedom to follow a religion if it genuinely adds value to their lives and those around them. It doesn't harm them. I believe in freedom of religion and spirituality. Who am I to claim I've discovered the absolute truth? We all walk around with our own version of truth, and how you move closer to the infinite is up to you. However, there is some danger, as truth may arise from acting out improper interpretation and beliefs which focus on some verses while ignoring others. An example of this would be extremism, such as in the hate group Westboro Baptist Church. This leads to the possibility of demonization, and this is made so much more worse when it is actually projection by the accusing group. Enter the satanic panic. While religion is great at bringing people together and creating community, it also creates cliques, which at first seem like groups of like-minded people, but may actually be boxes that isolate. When you were in school, you likely had the jocks who played sports, the skateboarders, the nerds, the slackers, the cheerleaders, the chess club, and so on. Being a part of one group brought a type of groupthink that might have looked down on those outside of the groups. Similarly, in prisons, you would see mafias, gangs, or racial hate groups forming their cliques to protect their brothers against the other groups. You see where I'm going with this? While it may be necessary for survival in prison, in the real world, the group members form the us, and those on the outside are them. Us and them seems relatively harmless in the beginning, that is, until the them group becomes demonized. You're probably familiar with the Salem witch trials, but did you know about the Satanic Panic? Let's give some background on this. The Satanic Panic was a collective expression of fear and projection in the 1980s and 90s. As the name suggests, it was a fear of satanic cults that were allegedly abusing and sacrificing children. Heavy metal music and Dungeons and Dragons were blamed. You might remember the playing of music records backwards and people claiming to hear "I Love Satan." Heck, even the other day, the Christian rock band Skillet was being demonized for making a metal version of a Christmas song. And they're a Christian rock band. Craziness. But unfortunately, I expected it at this point. Anyways, the Satanic Panic led to almost 200 people being charged with crimes based on unfounded accusations of satanic ritual abuse. From my home state back in 1993, there was the West Memphis 3, which involved 3 8-year-old boys who were murdered, and the blame was pinned on 3 18-year-old boys without any evidence linking them to the murders. It was claimed that they sacrificed these children in a satanic ritual, and they were all sentenced to life in prison, except for Damian Eccles, who was sentenced to death. In fact, Arkansas lawmakers had the DNA evidence of the actual killer, but refused to test it. That's a prime example of the Satanic Panic witch hunt. Thankfully, they are no longer in prison. though it cost them 18 or so years of their lives, and I'm sure lots of heartache and mental struggles in solitary confinement. Damien Eccles wrote books about his experience and has a YouTube channel focused on the magical arts if you are interested. His story is very interesting, and he used magic to help him through that. What about a response from the actual Satanist community? I'm not a worshiper of the Dark Lord, but I do study beliefs of all types, and there is an interesting documentary out there called Hail Satan. It is about how the Satanic Temple was started and what their purpose is. Spoiler alert, they fight for religious freedom and the people on the margins of society. They aren't even about worshiping the devil, at least in that variation of Satanism, as they are atheistic, and are more about defiance to the oppression of religious systems. A big portion of what they do is fight to keep church and state separated so all religions are able to be practiced and represented. Satanism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, and so on. You might have seen where cities tried to install a statue of the Ten Commandments at their capitals, and then an 8.5-foot tall bronze statue of Baphomet shows up on the Capitol grounds shortly after. I definitely support their mission of keeping church and state separated, especially as becoming a one-religion state or nation makes it easier to justify persecuting people from any other religion. Don't worry, we'll get to that point soon. At one point, they talked about the Satanic Panic, and one person mentioned that the Satanic Panic was a projection by the Christian church. The church was abusing children and blaming Satanists for what they, the Christians, were doing. Interesting. If you aren't familiar, projection is a defense mechanism where someone unconsciously attributes their own unacceptable feelings, impulses, or traits to another person or group. It's kind of like if you're in a bad mood, the world is going to look dreary and everyone sucks. We project what we hold inside, even if that is not truth. The world may look dreary and everyone sucks to you, but that is not reality. And so Satanism was being accused of awful things, and televangelists were part of the accusers, which is kind of ironic and funny to me. The word Satan means the accuser. According to history, projection has led many times to demonization, which stems from justification of actions by righteousness of religious interpretation, which is confounded by mass social acceptance and support. I mentioned the Satanic Panic being a witch hunt. So what about the witch trials? We know about the Salem witch trials where 200 people were accused and 19 were executed over fear of the devil in the years 1692 and 1693, but in Europe it is estimated that tens of thousands of people were killed as part of their witch trials between the 1400s and the 1600s, most of whom were likely not even witches, just normal people who unfortunately got caught up in mass psychosis, which led to the torture and slaughter of countless people. The Native Americans are another prime example of dehumanization. They were called savages and were driven from their lands or slaughtered as part of the Trail of Tears in the years 1831 to 1850. It is estimated that 13,000 to 17,000 Native Americans were killed and 60,000 were forcibly relocated. African Americans, they weren't considered people. They didn't have rights. They were considered property, which was less than human. They were slaves. African Americans had to use separate facilities from white people. The labels change, but it's all the same. It's all dehumanization. Do you see what I mean? When we demonize, we dehumanize. And we'll get to what that leads to soon. But the point I'm making here is that these witch hunts were or are projections of the evil going on within our supposedly God-centered places. Don't believe me? Let's look at some very recent examples of power and abuse within religion. Religious leaders, preachers, priests, monks, you name it, hold a tremendous amount of power because they're seen as representatives of God. In Catholic contexts especially, that's taken literally. The priest stands between you and God. If you sit in a confessional booth, you're supposedly confessing to God through the priest. And when he tells you what to do to be forgiven, like a handful of Hail Marys or whatever, he's speaking on God's behalf. Priests are basically like mall Santas. We know they're not actually God, but we assume they've got a direct phone line to the big guy or big gal, depending on your theology. People believe it, and that belief gives these leaders massive influence. With that influence comes power. People make huge life decisions based on what their pastor or priest says. Some folks go to a preacher for marriage counseling, even though he's not a licensed counselor. Sometimes that advice is helpful. Great. Other times, not so great. And then there's the darker side. The part everyone pretends not to see until it's plastered all over the news. We've all heard the stories of religious leaders abusing their power, and often abusing children. Yeah, I went there. It's uncomfortable, but it's real. Most people think first of Catholicism in that context. I know I certainly did. But Protestantism has its own share of scandals. Recently, Robert Morris, former preacher of the Gateway megachurch in Southlake, Texas, and previously part of President Trump's spiritual advisory board, was convicted of abusing a 12-year-old girl back in the 1980s. And that's just the one victim who came forward. In fact, she came forward countless times since what happened to her, but no one listened until now. On top of that, Mr. Morris is in trouble for misusing his congregation's tithing money, funneling donations into multiple multi-million-dollar homes, and who knows what else. There's actually a class action lawsuit going on because Mr. Morris said in a sermon that if you don't like where I'm sending your tithing money, you can have it back, or something along those lines. Televangelists like Morris preach prosperity. If you give your hard-earned money to me in the church, God will bless you for this whole year. I know this because God told me personally. Then they hop into their private jets and head off to their mansions while the people funding them struggle to pay rent. And while I was working on this episode, the Assemblies of God Church hit the news as well, and not in a good way. As KY3 reported in an article titled NBC News Report, Assemblies of God Churches shielded accused predators and allowed them to keep abusing children, the pattern continues. The article reads, NBC News uncovered a 50-year pattern of sex abuse, silence, and cover-up in the world's largest Pentecostal denomination. A children's pastor was caught filming girls in a church bathroom in Arkansas. Elders suspended him for a few weeks. In Illinois, a preacher was accused of sexually abusing children. Church leaders sent him to therapy rather than call police. In California, a worship minister went to prison for molesting boys. His congregation threw him a party when he returned. All of these men remained in ministry in the Assemblies of God, the world's largest Pentecostal denomination. All went on to abuse more children. Since the 1970s, Assemblies of God churches have repeatedly reinstated ministers and volunteer leaders accused of sexual misconduct, returning them to pulpits and youth groups, an NBC News investigation found. While some of the other largest Christian denominations now require safeguards such as background checks and mandatory reporting, National Assemblies of God leaders have resisted, arguing such rules would increase legal risk, undermine its commitment to local church autonomy, and defy a core biblical command to forgive. The result is a patchwork system that has protected accused predators and left generations of children in danger. NBC News identified nearly 200 Assemblies of God pastors, church employees, and volunteer leaders accused of sexual abuse over the past half-century, based on a nationwide search of lawsuits, criminal records, and news archives. Together, they allegedly abused more than 475 people, the overwhelming majority of them children. The allegations stretch into this year when a 10-year-old girl said in a lawsuit that her pastor groped her during Bible study. Survivors say that they were violated in sanctuaries, at pastors' homes, and in tents on camping trips. A California preacher was accused of holding knives to children's chests while forcing them to perform sex acts on each other. In Louisiana, a youth leader confessed to drugging and assaulting 3 boys during a sleepover. A couple in New Mexico say their pastor used his spiritual authority to drive them apart, then coerced the wife into sex. Of the alleged abusers, 123 were ministers, and nearly half of those were youth pastors. Others were church employees, youth group leaders, or Sunday school teachers. Dozens were accused of luring boys through the Royal Rangers, a Pentecostal version of the Boy Scouts. In about 30 instances, church leaders place alleged abusers into positions of authority after they have been accused, freeing them to strike again. Convicted sex offenders led youth groups. Accused ministers were reinstated or quietly moved to new congregations. As a result, according to lawsuits and police records, dozens more children were abused. In nearly 40 other cases, leaders allegedly covered up or dismissed reports of misconduct, often by failing to alert police or pressuring victims to stay quiet. Melody Meza recalled a leader in her congregation praying for lying demonic spirits to leave her after she reported abuse by a church elder. "They made me feel like something was wrong with me and not the person abusing me," said Meza, one of nearly 20 people suing an Assemblies of God church in California accused of concealing decades of abuse. Others said preachers twisted scripture to silence them. "Touch not the Lord's anointed," pastors warned, citing a verse from Psalms that some interpret as a command to never question spiritual leaders. Courtney Blackburn says she wishes her church's former leaders had looked to another passage, one in which Jesus commanded followers to protect children. When she reported misconduct by her youth pastor in Arkansas, she said they left him in place. He went on to sexually assault 2 children, criminal records show. "They preach every single day about following the Bible," Blackburn said. "So why aren't they?" Wow. Deep breath. That is quite disturbing. You could argue that abuse doesn't happen only in churches, and you'd be right. It happens everywhere, in daycares and schools and youth programs, and countless institutions. Trafficking isn't confined to religion either. Unfortunately, human beings are capable of terrible things no matter where they gather. But church carries a different weight in the public imagination. I'm not talking about my current perspective, the one where I see many beliefs as misinterpreted and many leaders as misguided. I'm talking about how the average person views a church and the people in positions of authority there. Priests, preachers, youth leaders, spiritual mentors. From the outside, these are supposed to be the people closest to God. They're the ones who are meant to embody what a godly life looks like. In Catholicism especially, if you want the assurance that your sins are truly forgiven, you go to confession. You sit in a booth and confess to someone believed to be standing between you and God himself. So when the church is exposed not only for abusing children, but for covering it up, protecting the perpetrators and keeping them in positions of spiritual authority where they can continue abusing even more children, it hits differently. It's not just wrong. It's a betrayal of everything people are told to trust. These aren't just leaders. They are the ones who are supposed to be setting the example, guiding people toward God, embodying the virtues they preach. Yet instead of being spiritual guardians and leaders, some have become the very hypocrites Jesus warned about, unclean on the inside and full of death, standing at the gates of heaven, unable to enter themselves, and blocking the innocent from entering heaven too. In fact, they are the true devil they claim to save us from, and creating everlasting hell on earth for those within their reach. Welcome to the Upside Down, a mirror of what we thought was reality. Next, I want to focus on extreme belief. Religious extremism has been a problem for a long time, and in many ways it starts with something that sounds good on the surface: righteousness. The trouble begins when a text believed to be inspired by God passes through the minds of human beings, minds that are imperfect, biased, emotional, fearful, and limited. Once you add human interpretation to divine inspiration, things can go sideways and become twisted. We just talked about that with the abuse within the church. And when enough people agree on a particular interpretation, a movement forms. And from there, denominations begin branching out in every direction, even the so-called non-denominations. Because these beliefs are rooted in what people perceive as the words of the highest power in existence, conviction forms quickly. Because these beliefs are rooted in what people perceive as the words of the highest power in existence, conviction forms quickly. And when belief becomes conviction, conviction becomes righteousness. And righteousness makes people feel justified in their actions, sometimes for good, but often in ways that divide and harm. For example, if someone believes their scripture condemns homosexuality or sorcery, they may feel morally justified in attacking people who fall into those categories. In Jesus' time, that could mean stoning someone to death. Today, while not everyone in a church would behave that way, some people will remain in churches that preach those messages. And it doesn't take many to do real damage. All it takes is one charismatic leader and a group of vulnerable followers who have surrendered their own inner authority. Remember earlier when I was talking about religion stripping away power and giving it to leaders? This is where that dynamic becomes dangerous. Without their own sense of divine connection, the birthright I believe every individual possesses, and subsequently a loss of trust in our intuition that tells us when something is truly off, people become easier to control, easier to radicalize, easier to mislead, as this new teaching becomes the guiding voice. So when does righteousness tip over into extremism? There's a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's what happens when humans create a version of God that reflects their desires, fears, and prejudices rather than the other way around. Take the Westboro Baptist Church as an example. If you're unfamiliar, the Westboro Baptist Church is a small, independent U.S.-based hate group known for its extreme anti-gay, anti-Semitic, and anti-American rhetoric, primarily expressed through widely condemned public protests. It is not affiliated with any mainstream Baptist denomination and is considered an extremist group by most religious and secular organizations. I don't want to give them more attention than necessary, but they're a clear illustration of my point. Their entire belief system comes from a very selective reading of certain Bible verses. And even then, it wasn't they, the congregation, who came up with those interpretations. It began with their founder, Fred Phelps Sr., whose influence manipulated the thinking of a small group that later spread through generations like a kind of spiritual infection. This is what happens when people pick and choose verses to support their worldview while ignoring everything else. It's also what I mean when I say man created God in his image, a reversal of the original idea from Genesis. Instead of seeing God clearly, people project their own shadows onto him. And the tragic irony, many of the verses they conveniently overlook come from Jesus himself. In Matthew 7, he says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Somehow, Westboro Baptist forgot that part. Now, I know most people don't go around holding protests against everything they disagree with. So let's bring our focus back to what this episode is really building toward: religious persecution. One of the major reasons I wanted to take on this question is religion bad is because beneath all the debates and opinions, there are very real people around the world who are suffering because of their spiritual identity. I especially want to highlight the persecution and genocide currently happening to Christians, as this has been hidden from us in America until very recently. According to a report from persecution.org, each year an estimated 300 million Christians around the world are persecuted because of their faith in Jesus. Our brothers and sisters are beaten, imprisoned, and even killed. In many places, it is illegal to share the gospel at all. Another article titled "A Case for Nigeria's CPC Status Under IRFA" focuses specifically on the crisis in Nigeria. It states a few key points. Everyone deserves the fundamental human right to freely practice their religion or belief without fear of punishment or retribution. Each of us has an innate human dignity that affords us the freedom to choose or change our religion or to hold no religion at all. The United States has long been a global leader in promoting this right, with religious freedom being ingrained in our founding documents. Unfortunately, for almost 2 decades, the right to religious freedom has rapidly deteriorated in the West African country of Nigeria. After the rise of Islamic terrorist groups in 2009, Nigeria's Christian community, in particular, has faced extremist violence at one of the fastest growing rates. From then until the present day, more than 50,000 Christians have been slaughtered by violent insurgency groups, and the silence from Western nations on this genocide is appalling. Under the International Religious Freedom Act, IRFA, it is U.S. policy to advance the fundamental right of religious freedom and hold accountable those nations that perpetrate religious freedom violations. Despite this, apart from 2020, the U.S. State Department has failed to place Nigeria on its country of particular concern designation list for engaging in and tolerating severe violations of religious freedom. This significant oversight not only undermines the efficacy of U.S. foreign policy regarding international religious freedom, but also neglects to hold the Nigerian government accountable for its complicity in the violence against Christians. And that's just one nation. It doesn't include the persecution of Christians in places like Russia, Azerbaijan, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, North Korea, and Vietnam. However, there has been a recent development. Someone once told me that if any U.S. leader publicly acknowledged the genocide, they'd be forced to respond. Or maybe that was in another podcast. And on November 1st, President Trump issued a statement directly threatening consequences for Nigeria's handling of Christian persecution. And his exact words were, "If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria, and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. I am hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast." I normally avoid politics entirely because, honestly, politics today function more like rival religions, complete with fanatics and holy wars. But independent of who says that, the greater point stands. No one should be killed for their beliefs. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, Satanists, no one should be exterminated because of what they believe or don't believe. And regardless of your stance on President Trump, something needs to be done to stop needless killing. And if you look deeper into it, you'll find cases where people attending their church service suddenly become overrun by terrorist groups who hack everyone to death with machetes. Yes, it is really that bad, and that is just one example of countless disgusting events. While I specifically focus on Christianity's persecution here, all religions are being persecuted around the world, even now. Sadly, history is overflowing with examples of exactly that, which brings us to the bigger picture of religious genocide over the past 100 years. It isn't only Christians who are suffering. People of all faith traditions across many cultures, nations, and eras have been persecuted or wiped out because of their spiritual or ethnic identity. This is not a full list that I am about to talk about. We're focusing specifically on religiously linked genocides of the last 100 years. Not all of these were religion versus religion. In many cases, governments fueled hatred for political gain, and religious identity simply became the easiest justification. And as I've said, righteousness, no matter who wields it, can be weaponized. This is where demonization leads to dehumanization. Dehumanization eventually leads to genocide. Here are some of the major examples over the last 100 years. Palestinian genocide in Gaza by the Israeli government, which is ongoing. Whether one frames this as political or religious, religion is being used rhetorically to justify actions. The death estimates range from 65,000 to 335,000. In whatever one's stance, massive civilian deaths rooted in identity, fear, and divine justification fit the pattern of how genocide happens. Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, 2016 to present. The persecution of the Muslim Rohingya population by Myanmar's military, deaths estimated between 9,000 and 43,000. The Uyghur persecution in China from 2016 to present. This case is not defined by mass killing, but by cultural and biological eradication. Reports include mass detention, surveillance, torture, forced labor, family separation, repression of religion, and forced sterilization. This is genocide through erasure, not execution. Yazidi genocide, Iraq and Syria, 2014 to 2017. The minority Yazidi religious community was targeted by ISIS. Estimated deaths were 2,100 to 5,000. The Bosnian genocide from 1992 to 1995. Bosnian Muslims, called Bosniaks, were systematically killed. The deaths ranged between 31,000 and 62,000. The Sabra and Shatila massacre in Lebanon in 1982. Between 460 and 3,500 Palestinian and Lebanese Shia Muslims were killed. The Bangladesh genocide in 1971, targeting Bengalis, especially Bengali Hindus. Deaths were 300,000 to 3 million. Additionally, a note was made that 200,000 to 400,000 Bengali women were sexually abused as part of this. The Holocaust from 1941 to 1945. The Nazi genocide against the Jewish people. The deaths ranged between 5.1 million and 7 million. The genocide of the Bosniaks and Croats from 1941 to 1945 by Chetnik forces in Yugoslavia. The deaths were 18,000 to 32,000 Croats and 29,000 to 33,000 Bosnian Muslims. The Nazi genocide of Jewish Poles from 1939 to 1945. The death range was 1.8 million to 3 million. Mussolini's genocide in Libya, 1920s to the 1930s. Although framed as racial and imperialist, it targeted a population deeply tied to Islamic identity. Deaths ranged between 83,000 to 125,000 Libyan Arabs. The Armenian, Assyrian, Sappho, Greek, and Pontic genocides, 1894 to 1924, carried out by the Ottoman Empire. Deaths were approximately 2 million Christians. This list is eye-opening and disturbing, but I want to add a special mention as I learned some hidden history as I was working on this episode. Shout out to the Netflix show Dark Winds and my wife for encouraging me to watch it. Within that show, they shine light onto some of the darkness they experienced. Not back in the 1800s, way more recently in the 1960s and 70s. And while it is not religion-fueled per se, I feel it's necessary to shine light on something I don't think is taught in American history classes. Or at least I don't remember this. I remember the Trail of Tears and slavery, but not this. Here's an article from JSTOR Daily called The Little Known History of the Forced Sterilization of Native American Women. Jane Lawrence documents the forced sterilization of thousands of Native American women by the Indian Health Service in the 1960s and 1970s. Two 15-year-old Native American women went into the hospital for tonsillectomies and came out with tubal ligations. Another Native American woman requested a womb transplant, only to reveal that she had been told that that was an option after her uterus had been removed against her will. Cheyenne women had their fallopian tubes severed, sometimes after being told that they would be untied again, or that they could be untied again. For many, America's history of brutal experimentation on people of color is perhaps best summed up by the Tuskegee experiment, in which doctors let African American men suffer from syphilis for a period of over 40 years. But another medical outrage is less well known. Jane Lawrence documents the forced sterilization of thousands of Native American women by the Indian Health Service in the 1960s and 1970s, procedures thought to have been performed on 1 out of every 4 Native American women at the time, against their knowledge or consent. Both the IHS and its dark history of forced sterilization were the result of long-standing, often ham-fisted attempts to address American Indians' healthcare needs, writes Lawrence. Medical services were part of U.S. agreements with sovereign tribes from as early as 1832, when a treaty with the Ho-Chunk, then often called the Winnebago, included the services of a physician in exchange for land in what is now Wisconsin. With the arrival of the Progressive era, health interventions became even more of a priority in the Department of the Interior and later the newly formed Indian Health Service devoted resources to education and medical care for American Indians on reservations. Though the IHS did deliver better health care, it operated under historical assumptions that Native people and people of color were morally, mentally, and socially defective long after it was founded in 1955. Some of the IHS doctors did not believe that American Indian and other minority women had the intelligence to use other methods of birth control effectively, and that there were already too many minority of individuals causing problems in the nation, writes Lawrence. Assisted by government assumptions that high Native American birth rates should be stemmed, and bolstered by lax law enforcement and inaccurate descriptions of medical procedures provided to women who thought they were being treated for things like appendicitis, a rash of forced sterilizations began in the 1960s. Even after legislation designed to protect women from forced sterilization was passed in 1974, the abuse of sterilizations continued. Between 1970 and 1976 alone, between 25 and 50% of Native American women were sterilized. That is sickening, to say the least. It's embarrassing. And I even heard that it went deeper than that. By reducing the numbers through the silent genocide attempt of the indigenous peoples, they would have less political power. Let's take a breath. That's the last century alone, and I didn't include the countless non-religious genocides, ethnic cleansings, or political purges. My personal takeaway is this. Religion is often the excuse, not the cause. Fear makes it easy to manipulate people, and demonization leads to dehumanization. This is all fueled by justification, by interpretation of religious texts, and agreement by large groups of people without question. Justification creates righteousness, no matter how atrocious the action. And righteousness, whether religious or secular, creates hell on earth for us all. Before we begin closing out this episode, I want to share one of my favorite teachings from Jesus, one that speaks directly to everything we've been discussing. This isn't about one religion versus another. It isn't about Christians versus Jews. It isn't about the ancient Pharisees versus modern people. And it certainly isn't me pushing Christianity down your throat. I certainly don't like that either. This passage is Jesus calling out religious hypocrisy itself. Those who use spiritual authority not to uplift, but to control. Not to serve, but to dominate. Not to heal, but to burden. Every religion today has its own Pharisees, its own leaders who weaponize Scripture for power and become lost in their sick lusts. And Jesus' words here are not a condemnation of Judaism. They're a condemnation of all hypocrisy in all spiritual traditions across all time. I'm including this because it mirrors exactly what we just explored, how righteousness can be twisted into oppression. And with that context, this is a paraphrased version of Matthew 23. Woe to you, hypocrites, teachers of the law who sit in positions of spiritual authority, but do not practice what you preach. They place heavy burdens on others and do nothing to help lift them up. Everything they do is for show, the titles, the robes, the positions of honor. But the greatest among you should be a servant. Woe to you, you hypocrites! You shut the door of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves don't enter, and you prevent others from entering as well. Woe to you, blind guides! You obsess over the surface of religion while ignoring justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You clean the outside of the cup, but inside it is full of greed and self-indulgence. First clean the inside, then the outside will follow. Woe to you, you who are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. You look righteous on the outside, but inside you are full of hypocrisy. You build monuments to the prophets your ancestors murdered, yet fail to see that you repeat the same mistakes. Woe to you, hypocrites! To me, this passage is timeless. It isn't about one religion. It's about the human tendency to weaponize the sacred. Jesus wasn't condemning belief. He was condemning hypocrisy. And that's the same hypocrisy we see today when righteousness becomes power, and power wielded without discipline creates abuse, and abuse creates hell on earth for the innocent victims. Or righteousness becomes extremism, and extremism becomes demonization, which of course leads to dehumanization, and then to persecution, which ultimately leads to genocide. So now that we have walked through the shadows, let's talk about what faith can look like when it's rooted not in fear or power, but in compassion, humility, and love. While religion can appear to be the problem based on everything I've covered, I don't think it's that simple. It's not the rituals, the texts, or even the beliefs themselves. Religions are simply vehicles that can be used for good or for ill. The real issues lie in the motives of those who lead, in the unwillingness to question verses that clearly cause harm, such as those that promote slavery or demonization, and in the mindless surrender of power to people who then abuse their positions. Religion can do tremendous good. It can lift people up, teach compassion, and cultivate community. Churches across the world engage in mission work, provide local aid, and help those in need. One church I went to recently even says every Sunday that if you're struggling, you should take what you need from the offering bowl that's being passed around. And then the most recent one I went to had a giant stack of presents that were getting ready to be sent to children who may not otherwise have been given gifts for Christmas. That's awesome stuff. There's so much good that comes from religion, even as some of its origins may have been less than pure. I truly believe that most people are inherently good-hearted, as we all maintain that divine spark of God, that image within us. But religion has also been misused, and when ideologies demonize entire groups or other faiths, the process of dehumanization begins, and dehumanization eventually leads to genocide. People once assumed that evil came from Satan or demons, but history shows that the worst harm often came from those who are said to be closest to God. The very people Jesus sought out were the ones pushed to the margins, not the ones wielding religious authority. History is filled with atrocities committed in religion's name. The pattern always begins the same way, when we see those who differ from us as them instead of us. These destructive ideologies are inherited from previous generations, but they don't have to continue. We can choose to interrupt the cycle and be the change that redeems religion's reputation. That is, if we choose to be involved with them at all. We can choose to not only stop perpetuating the problem of destructive ideologies, we can also speak up when we see things we know are wrong. You are way more powerful than you have been led to believe. Each of us, even on the individual scale, which seems so minuscule and insignificant, carries the entire image of God. And there is great power in that, which must be wielded with respect. Because guess what? While this body and personality we embody is unique, every one of us carries that same image. Opening our eyes to harmful ideas helps us break down barriers. It reminds us that despite our differences, we are all connected. And when we follow our intuition, reclaiming our divine connection and guidance, we rise quietly but firmly in peaceful defiance of systems that keep people powerless. We stand with our brothers and sisters in love, regardless of race, creed, or belief. This is where metaphysics helps us see the bigger picture. Earlier, I described religions and their gods, goddesses, and idols as the finger pointing at the moon. They help us orient toward our spiritual goal. But when we say, this is the one true God, and all others are of the devil, we put the infinite into a box of our own making. We limit God's ability to manifest in countless ways for countless peoples. Division and alienation follow, making it easier to dehumanize those who believe differently, and historically to justify the slaughter of millions. We don't have to repeat these mistakes. Religion can elevate us, but only if we honor the infinite ways the divine can appear and treat each other as sacred. We can choose understanding over judgment, inclusion over alienation, and love over fear. Destructive ideologies don't have to continue, but we must stop creating God in our own image and instead allow the divine to reveal itself on its own terms to each person. When we do that, we honor the infinite expressions of God, or whatever you want to call it, as well as each other. And that is where true power, true unity, and genuine spiritual growth truly lie. Thank you for joining me on this journey today with the Unifying Field podcast. We've touched on just a fraction of the vastness that connects us all, but remember, the exploration never ends. Keep asking questions, keep seeking answers, and stay curious. As we part ways, may you carry a little more wonder, a little more peace, and a renewed sense of connection with the world around you. Until next time, take a deep breath, question everything, and remember, the infinite is always within reach. Please like and subscribe, and share with anyone you think may enjoy this type of content.